Billionaire received a call and rushed to the hospital.
That was so
His
weird.
newborn twin's cry changed him forever. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The elevator climbed 47 floors in complete silence, carrying Noah Redgrave toward another boardroom, where another group of executives would nod at his every word, regardless of whether they agreed or not. At 37, he had built an empire that stretched across 3 continents, luxury hotels that catered to people who measured their worth in zeros and exclusivity. But success, Noah had learned, was a cold companion. His reflection stared back from the polished steel doors, sharp jawline, steel gray eyes that had intimidated competitors into submission, and a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Everything about Noah Redgrave screamed control, calculated, untouchable. The penthouse office of Redgrave Properties occupied the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city below. People looked like ants from this height, small, manageable, exactly how Noah preferred to see the world. "Sir, the interior design team is here for the Alpine Resort presentation," his assistant announced through the intercom, her voice carrying the professional distance he demanded from all his employees. Noah didn't look up from the financial reports spread across his mahogany desk. Numbers never lied. Numbers never disappointed. Numbers never left. Send them in and remind them, I don't have time for creative explanations. I want results, not poetry. The conference room door opened and a small group filed in, carrying portfolios and tablets. Noah finally glanced up, his gaze sweeping over the team with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. His eyes stopped when they reached her. Clara Everett stood at the back of the group, her auburn hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing a simple navy blazer that somehow managed to look both professional and effortlessly elegant. She wasn't looking at him with the mixture of fear and reverence he was accustomed to. Instead, she was studying the architectural plans spread across the conference table, her green eyes focused and calculating. "Mr. Redgrave," the lead contractor began, his voice slightly trembling. "We're excited to present the renovation concepts for the Alpine Resort. This project represents a significant..." "Skip the introduction," Noah interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Show me what you've got." The presentation began with typical hotel lobby concepts. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, the kind of ostentatious luxury that screamed wealth, but whispered nothing about comfort or soul. Noah watched with growing impatience as slide after slide revealed the same predictable opulence he'd seen in dozens of properties. "This is garbage," he said finally, standing abruptly. "Generic, soulless. Anyone could walk into any of these spaces and forget they were there 5 minutes later." The room fell silent. The lead contractor's face drained of color, but Clara Everett stepped forward. "You're absolutely right," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Which is why I designed something completely different." Noah's eyebrows rose slightly. No one had agreed with his criticism in years. They usually scrambled to defend their work or apologize profusely. Clara did neither. She moved to the front of the room with quiet confidence, connecting her tablet to the projector. The screen filled with images that made Noah's breath catch unexpectedly. The designs weren't shouting for attention. They were whispering secrets. "The Alpine Resort should feel like coming home after a long journey," Clara explained, clicking through images of warm wood tones, stone fireplaces, and windows that seemed to bring the mountain landscape inside. "Luxury isn't always about gold and marble. Sometimes it's about feeling completely at peace." Noah found himself leaning forward, studying the designs with genuine interest for the first time in months. The spaces she'd created looked lived in, loved. They had character, personality, something his hotels had always lacked. "The cost?" he asked, though his usual sharp edge had softened slightly. 30% less than the original proposal, Clara replied without hesitation. "Sustainable materials, local artisans, and designs that won't need updating every 5 years." For a moment, Noah said nothing. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, waiting for his verdict. Clara met his gaze steadily, neither challenging nor submissive, just present. "Everyone else can leave," he said finally. "Ms. Everett, you stay." The room emptied quickly, leaving Noah and Clara alone with her designs glowing on the wall between them. She didn't seem nervous about being singled out. If anything, she appeared more relaxed without the crowd. Why should I trust you with a $50 million project?
Yeah, there's a sword
Noah
over here.
asked, circling the
Sword's
conference table slowly, like a
But
shark
there's
testing the
currently
waters.
people shooting.
Clara smiled. Not the practiced smile of someone trying to close a deal, but something
marked.
genuine and slightly
Is
amused.
that the gas station?
Because you're tired of being surrounded by beautiful
gas
things
station
that
that's
make you
over?
feel
That's
nothing
back
at all.
there.
The
Somewhere.
words hit him like a physical blow. Noah stopped circling and stared at her, trying to determine if she was being calculated or simply honest.
This, sword.
In his experience,
Purple sword
honesty
behind you.
was rarer than diamonds and twice as dangerous. But Clara Everett wasn't backing down, and for the first time in years, Noah
there, Bella,
Redgrave
right,
found
Mark.
himself wondering what it would be like to feel something
Where the
real.
purple shock
The
is.
helicopter ride to the Alpine Resort construction site should have been routine. Noah had taken this same flight dozens of times, reviewing
No,
contracts while the landscape blurred beneath
Purple
him.
twins.
But today,
You buy 'em
Clara
for
Everett
1,000.
sat across from him, sketching modifications to the lobby design with the focused
yellow
intensity
car
of
over
someone
here.
completely absorbed in her work.
Here, I'm moving
She
this
hadn't
direction
spoken
anyways,
since
if you
they'd
guys wanna
lifted
push
off
in
20
with me,
minutes
move
ago.
into zone with me.
Most people felt compelled to fill silence
Jay up
around
here. Jay,
Noah
go
with
come up
nervous
top to the gas
chatter or
station.
attempts at flattery. Clara seemed perfectly content to let the quiet stretch between them, broken only by the rhythmic thump of rotor blades. "You're not impressed by helicopters," Noah observed, noting how she hadn't even glanced out the window at the sprawling mountain vista below. "I'm more interested in what we're going to build than how we get there," Clara replied without looking up from her sketch pad. "Though I have to ask, do you always travel with your architects, or am I getting special treatment?" There was something in her tone, not flirtation exactly, but a gentle teasing that no one
Lots
had
of shooting
dared
going on
attempt
over
with him
there.
in years.
Yeah, Bella, just be
Noah
careful
found
when you're
himself almost
purchasing.
smiling before
Figure it out
catching
when you're
himself.
purchasing.
"I don't trust people with my projects unless I can watch them work," he said,
Not the
falling
person up
back
top
on his
on that
usual
hill.
businesslike demeanor. "Fair enough." Clara finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly.
More Mikus
"But you
on
should
top of the
know,
hill.
I work better when I'm not being watched like a suspect in an interrogation room." The pilot's voice crackled
Bella, you're
through
out in
their
the open.
headsets, announcing their descent toward the construction
move.
site. As they landed, Noah couldn't shake the
What do you
feeling
need?
that Clara Everett was unlike anyone he'd ever hired. She challenged him without being confrontational,
think two.
remained calm under pressure, and seemed completely unimpressed by his wealth and power. It was unsettling and oddly refreshing. The construction site sprawled across a pristine valley,
yeah, two
surrounded
shield
by
cakes is fine.
towering pines and granite peaks. Half-finished structures
shield
rose from
cakes,
the
yeah.
ground like the bones of some massive creature, waiting to be
Careful,
brought to
careful,
life.
careful.
Clara stepped out of the helicopter and immediately began walking toward the main building, her practical boots crunching on the gravel path. "The foundation work is solid," she said, running her hand along a partially completed stone wall. "But see this? The windows are placed wrong. They're designed to show off the view, but they don't consider how the light will move through the space during different seasons." Noah watched as she pulled out a tablet, quickly sketching modifications that would
Oh, you gotta move,
reposition
you
the
gotta move.
windows to capture both the mountain vista and optimal natural lighting. Her hands
Take
moved
medkits.
with confident
Buy medkits
precision,
instead.
and he found himself
You've waited too
studying the
long.
curve of her wrist, the way she
Okay,
bit her
okay.
lower lip when concentrating. That would mean tearing down
Okay, okay.
3 weeks of work,
But you got a
he
long
said,
ways to go.
though his tone lacked its usual edge of displeasure. "It would mean building something people will remember for the right reasons," Clara countered. "Your call, Mr. Redgrave. Do you want fast, or do you want right?" The construction foreman, a weathered man named Dalton who'd worked on 6 of Noah's properties, approached with a clipboard full of concerns. "Mr. Redgrave, sir, we've got some issues with the timeline if we're making major changes." "Show me," Noah said, but his attention kept drifting to Clara, who had wandered toward the planned pool area and was now crouched beside what would eventually become an infinity edge, measuring angles with her hands. For the next 2 hours, they walked through every section of the resort. Clara questioned everything, not in a way that challenged his authority, but with genuine curiosity about making each space better. She asked Dalton about his experience with mountain construction, consulted with the local stonemason about native materials, and even chatted with the security guard about sightlines and guest privacy. "She talks to everyone," Dalton mentioned quietly to Noah as they
here, Bella,
watched
come here.
Clara discussing soil drainage with
I
the
got you
landscaping crew. "Most architects just tell us what to do. She actually listens." As the afternoon wore on, Noah found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in months. Clara's enthusiasm was infectious. She got excited about things like the way afternoon light would hit a reading nook, or how the sound of the nearby stream could be incorporated into the spa design. She made him see possibilities instead of just problems. "The helicopter won't be back for an hour," Noah said as they finished touring the guest quarters. "There's a diner about 10 minutes down the mountain." Decent coffee. Clara looked surprised. Are you asking me to have coffee with you, Mr. Redgrave? I'm saying I need coffee, and you probably do too, Noah replied. But there was something almost hesitant in his voice, as if he wasn't quite sure himself what he was suggesting. The diner was exactly the kind of place Noah would normally avoid. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and a menu laminated in plastic. But Clara slid into a booth like she belonged there, ordering black coffee and apple pie from a waitress who clearly recognized her. You've been here before, Noah observed. I drove up last week to see the site, Clara said. Mabel makes the best pie in 3 counties. You should try some. I don't eat sugar. Of course you don't. Clara's smile was gentle, not mocking. Let me guess. You have a personal trainer, a nutritionist, and a very rigid schedule that doesn't allow for spontaneous pie. Noah found himself oddly defensive. Discipline is how you build an empire, and joy is how you build a life, Clara replied softly. They're not mutually exclusive, you know. She pushed her plate toward the center of the table. One bite won't destroy your empire, Mr. Redgrave. For reasons he couldn't explain, Noah picked up the extra fork and took a small bite of pie. It was warm, sweet, with a hint of cinnamon that reminded him of something from long ago. Maybe his grandmother's kitchen, back when he was young enough to believe in things like happiness and safety. Good? Clara asked. Noah nodded, surprised by the small pleasure of it. Good. As they sat in the fading afternoon light, something shifted between them. Not dramatically, but like ice beginning to crack under the first warm day of spring. Clara told him about her childhood in Colorado, her love of sustainable design, her dream of creating spaces that felt like home. Noah found himself sharing details about the resort project that he'd never discussed with anyone. His vision of creating something lasting, something that would matter beyond profit margins. When the helicopter returned to take them back to the city, Noah felt an unfamiliar reluctance to leave. The afternoon had passed too quickly, and for the first time in years, he'd forgotten to check his phone even once. As Clara gathered her sketches and tablet, she paused. Thank you for today, Mr. Redgrave. It's been a long time since I've worked with someone who actually cares about getting it right. Noah, he said quietly. What? My name is Noah. You can call me Noah. Clara smiled. That same genuine, unguarded smile that had caught him off guard in the conference room. Okay, Noah. See you Monday for the revised plans. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them back toward the city lights, Noah stared out at the darkening mountains and realized that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to Monday. Monday arrived with an unexpected snowstorm that blanketed the city in pristine white, transforming the urban landscape into something softer, quieter. Noah stood at his office window, watching pedestrians below navigate the slippery sidewalks with careful steps, their breath visible in small puffs of vapor. He'd been thinking about Clara all weekend, an unprecedented distraction that had left him restless and oddly unsettled. He'd even caught himself wondering what she was doing, whether she liked snow, if she was somewhere warm and safe. The thought unsettled him. Noah Redgrave didn't wonder about people's personal lives. He didn't care about their comfort or safety beyond what it meant for his business operations. But Clara Everett had somehow slipped past his carefully constructed defenses with nothing more than genuine interest in her work and an unguarded smile. Sir, Miss, Everett called. His assistant informed him through the intercom. The roads to her studio are impassable due to the storm. She's requesting to work from the main office today if that's acceptable. Noah found himself saying yes before he'd fully processed the request. Within an hour, Clara had transformed the small conference room adjacent to his office into a makeshift design studio. Her laptop connected to multiple monitors, sketches spread across every surface, and a thermos of what smelled like homemade soup sitting beside a stack of material samples. I hope you don't mind the chaos, Clara said when Noah appeared in the doorway. I think better when I can see everything at once. She'd traded her usual professional blazer for a soft gray sweater that made her green eyes seem brighter. Her hair was loose today, falling in gentle waves around her shoulders, and she had reading glasses perched on her nose that somehow made her look both intellectual and approachable. The storm's supposed to last all day, Noah said, stepping into the room. You could have worked from home. I could have, Clara agreed, adjusting her glasses as she studied a fabric sample. But I wanted to show you something. She turned her laptop screen toward him, revealing a 3D rendering of the resort's main lobby. But this wasn't the design from her original presentation. This was something new, warmer, more
Just
intimate,
lasering
with
everybody?
reading nooks
That- that's
tucked into
cool. That's
alcoves and a massive stone fireplace that looked like it had been there for generations. I've been thinking about what you said, Clara
Alright, let's go
continued,
see
about wanting to
who
create
is
something
on right
lasting,
now.
something that matters. So I
Maybe that-
redesigned the
close
entire
next to
ground
see if I actually
floor.
had myself
Noah
tapped.
moved closer, studying the detailed renderings.
I'm not that
She'd
smart.
incorporated elements he hadn't even realized he'd mentioned. The way light fell through tall windows, the importance of spaces where people could have quiet conversations, the subtle
my gosh,
luxury
yeah.
that
I'm gonna
whispered
go
rather
take a
than
shower and
shouted.
go to bed.
This is, he paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much. This is exactly what I had in my head, but couldn't articulate. That's my job,
I think we're
Clara
gonna
said
go
simply,
to
to see what you're dreaming of and make it real. They spent the morning refining details, their conversation flowing easily between technical specifications and broader design philosophy. Noah found himself relaxing in ways that
Since you ate
surprised
my
him,
food.
asking questions about
you
her
ate my
process,
food.
sharing stories about other properties that had succeeded or failed. Around noon, Clara opened her thermos, and the rich aroma of homemade vegetable soup filled the room. Noah's stomach growled
All right, we're gonna
audibly,
head over to Stress
and Clara
today,
looked up with that gentle
then
smile he was beginning to
tomorrow morning, I think,
recognize. When's
for
the
the most
last
part,
time
this
you
whole
ate something that
week, we
wasn't
have,
delivered by a five-star restaurant?
solos,
She
and
asked.
we will
I don't
have
remember,
our,
Noah admitted. I made too
giveaway
much,
on Wednesday.
Clara said,
So we're
pulling a
doing
second container from her
2
bag.
giveaways.
My grandmother's
We have a $50
recipe.
gift card
She always
giveaway.
said soup was love you could taste. Noah
So
accepted
we
the
have
container
a
with
$50
unexpected
gift card
gratitude.
giveaway,
The soup
and
was
then we have
simple
a
but
bunch
perfect.
of
Vegetables and herbs in a rich broth that tasted like comfort and care.
bunch of these.
As they ate, Clara told him about her grandmother's
one
farmhouse in Vermont,
of the
where she'd
20
learned to cook
and
and
one of the
garden
50
and appreciate the value
this
of things
month.
made by hand. She sounds wonderful,
And then going
Noah said,
forward for the next
surprised
few
by the
months, we'll be
wistful note
doing
in his own voice.
2
She was.
20 gift
She
cards.
died when I was in
We'll be
college,
doing that,
but she
actually,
taught
instead
me
of
that the
like
best
a
things in life can't be
$35
bought or
gift card
scheduled
whatever.
or
We'll be doing
controlled.
2 of those.
They just happen when
So,
you're open to
that'll
them.
be a lot of fun.
Noah set down his
that's
spoon,
Wednesday.
studying
So New
Clara's
Year's
face.
Eve-
There was a
New Year's
sadness
Eve,
there, but
we'll do
also
that
a warmth
drawing.
that seemed to radiate outward, touching everything around her.
And I'm
He
gonna let you
realized
guys
he'd never
decide
met anyone
on
who
if the
carried
first
grief and
winner
joy with
gets
such
the
equal
50,
grace.
or if the
I never
second
knew
winner
my
gets the 50.
grandparents,
So
he
I'll have
found
you guys
himself
vote
saying. My
on that.
parents
We'll
were
take a
too
poll
focused on building the
on that
business to
on
maintain
Wednesday
family
morning to see
relationships.
who gets
That
which
must have been
drawing
lonely,
person gets
Clara
it.
said
Whiskey,
softly.
how we doing
The
today?
simple statement
Good
hit him
evening
like a
to you.
physical
Good
blow.
evening.
Lonely.
You say
Yes, that
first?
was
Yeah,
exactly
we'll run
what
a
it had
poll.
been,
I usually
though he'd
say
never
first
allowed himself to
also.
name it. Even now, surrounded
so
by
we'll see what
employees
happens.
and
So guys, have a
business
great
associates
night. We
and
will
people
see
who
you
sought his
tomorrow
approval,
morning.
the loneliness was a constant
Merry
companion.
Christmas Eve.
I learned to prefer solitude,
Merry Christmas
Noah
Eve.
said, the words coming out more defensive than he'd intended. There's a difference between choosing solitude and having it chosen for you, Clara replied
feeling
gently.
today, sir?
One is peaceful. The other is just empty. The afternoon passed quietly as they worked together, the storm outside creating a cocoon of intimacy that felt both foreign and surprisingly comfortable to Noah. Clara had a way of working that was both focused and relaxed. She'd sketch for an hour, then stretch and walk to the window to watch the snow, then return to her designs with fresh energy. Around 4 o'clock, Noah's assistant knocked on the door. Sir, your 5 o'clock meeting has been canceled due to the weather. Should I reschedule? Cancel everything for today, Noah heard himself saying. The roads are too dangerous for unnecessary travel. After his assistant left, Clara looked up from her laptop with raised eyebrows. Everything? Don't you run a billion-dollar company? The company will survive one afternoon without me micromanaging every decision, Noah said, though he couldn't quite believe he'd said it. As the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered city in shades of gold and pink, Clara packed up her materials with careful precision. Thank you for letting me work here today, she said, and for sharing lunch with me. Your grandmother would have liked the soup. How can you know that? Noah asked. Because anyone who raised someone capable of caring about getting things right would have appreciated simple, honest food, Clara replied. She might have been proud of the man you've become even if you're not sure she would be. The observation was so unexpectedly perceptive that Noah felt something crack open in his chest, a vulnerability he'd spent decades learning to suppress. Clara gathered her coat and bag, pausing at the door to look back at him. The roads should be clear by tomorrow, she said. But if you ever want company during another storm, I make excellent soup. After she left, Noah stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by the lingering warmth of her presence. The sketches she'd left behind were beautiful, but it was more than that. For one afternoon, his carefully controlled world had felt less like a fortress and more like a home. And for the first time in years, Noah Redgrave found himself hoping for another storm. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm Noah had never experienced before. Clara would arrive at his office each morning with fresh ideas, and that thermos of coffee that somehow tasted better than anything his personal barista could produce. They'd review the resort plans, debate materials and layouts, and somewhere in the process, Noah would find himself looking forward to her laugh, her questions, the way she unconsciously tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. It was dangerous territory, and Noah knew it. But for the first time in his adult life, he was choosing to ignore his own rules about maintaining professional distance. On a Thursday evening in late October, they were working late on the final design specifications when Clara's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and her face immediately shifted from focused concentration to concern. "I need to take this," she said apologetically, stepping into the hallway. Noah tried to focus on the contractor estimates spread across his desk, but Clara's voice carried through the partially open door. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her tone, urgent, worried, made it impossible to ignore. "Mom, slow down. What do you mean he fell? How bad is it? I'll be there as soon as I can book a flight." When Clara returned to the office, her face was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly as she gathered her materials. "Family emergency," she said without meeting his eyes. "My father had an accident. I need to fly to Denver tonight." "How bad?" Noah asked, surprising himself with how much he cared about the answer. "Bad enough that Mom's scared," Clara replied, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "He fell off a ladder working on their roof. They think he might have internal injuries." Noah watched her fumble with her laptop bag, her usual graceful efficiency replaced by the jerky movements of someone fighting panic. Without thinking, he reached for his phone. "Janet, I need the company jet prepared for immediate departure to Denver. And call Dr. Morrison. Tell him I may need a referral to the best trauma surgeon in Colorado." Clara looked up sharply. "Noah, I can't." "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "The jet will be ready in an hour. Pack whatever you need." "I can't accept this," Clara protested. "It's too much. I barely know you and—" "Your father is hurt," Noah interrupted, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Everything else can be figured out later." The flight to Denver took 2 hours. Clara spent most of it staring out the window at the lights scattered across the landscape below, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Noah worked quietly on his laptop, giving her space while remaining close enough to offer comfort if she needed it. "He taught me how to use tools when I was 8, Clara said suddenly, breaking the long silence. "Said I shouldn't have to depend on anyone to fix things that were important to me. Stubborn man probably thought he could repair that roof himself rather than hiring someone." "Sounds familiar," Noah said with a slight smile. "I once spent 3 days trying to fix my own car engine rather than admit I needed a mechanic. Did you succeed?" "I nearly destroyed the entire engine. Cost me twice as much to repair as it would have to just call for help in the first place." Clara managed a small laugh. "Men and their pride. It's not always about pride," Noah said quietly. "Sometimes it's about not wanting to be vulnerable, not wanting to need anyone." Something in his tone made Clara look at him more closely. In the dim cabin lighting, his usual armor of perfect composure seemed thinner somehow, more human. "Is that why you work so much?" she asked. "So you never have to need anyone?" The question hung in the air between them, more intimate than anything they'd shared before. Noah considered deflecting, giving her one of his practiced responses about dedication and responsibility. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. "My parents died when I was 22, he said. "Car accident on their way home from a business dinner. I learned that caring about people, depending on them, just gives life more ways to destroy you." Clara set down her tea and turned to face him fully. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was a long time ago." Grief doesn't follow schedules, Noah, especially the kind that teaches you to stop trusting life to be kind. Her understanding was so complete, so gentle, that Noah felt something inside him shift and settle, like a bone that had been broken for years finally healing properly. When they landed in Denver, Clara's mother was waiting at the hospital with red-rimmed eyes and hands that wouldn't stop moving. The surgery had gone well, she reported, but her husband would be in recovery for several hours. Noah watched Clara embrace her mother, noticing how she immediately slipped into the role of caretaker, asking practical questions about insurance and doctors, while providing the steady presence her mother clearly needed. "You should go home," Clara told him as they sat in the surgical waiting room at 2 in the morning. "You have meetings tomorrow and there's nothing you can do here. I don't have anewhere else to be." Noah
You hit on the
replied,
reel
and realized
Bill?
it was
Let's go,
completely
Ant.
true.
Let's go.
Around dawn, Clara's father was moved to a regular
You
room,
did win it?
groggy
Let's
but stable.
go.
Clara
Susie,
finally relaxed enough to fall
congratulations.
asleep
That's
in the
awesome.
uncomfortable hospital
Let's
chair
go.
beside his bed. Noah watched her sleep for a while, noting the way her face softened in rest, how young and vulnerable she looked. He found himself studying the curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell across her
good
forehead,
morning. Were you in
the
the
peaceful
Air Force
expression
also?
that made her seem almost ethereal in the early morning light.
Were you in the Air
It was
Force
then
also?
he realized that what he felt for Clara
Okay, I
Everett
saw
had
your
moved
little
far
symbol.
beyond professional
That's like the Air Force
admiration
symbol.
or even simple attraction. When Clara woke a few hours later, she found Noah in the hallway outside her father's room, talking quietly with a tall man in scrubs. "This
Yeah,
is Dr. Harrison,"
I don't know what
Noah
those
said as she
they're
approached.
called.
"He's the head of
The little
orthopedic
symbol,
surgery
by
here.
your name.
I asked him to consult on your father's
What is it
case."
even called?
Dr. Harrison smiled warmly at Clara.
Any
"Your
clue?
father is doing very well. The surgery was successful, and with proper
Yeah, well, I don't know
rehabilitation
what- I
he
don't know
should
what
make
it's
a
called.
full
No, just like the
recovery.
thing itself.
Mr. Redgrave has arranged for him to have a
Like
private
locker
room
or
and access to the best
icon,
physical
I don't know.
therapy team in the state." After Dr. Harrison left, Clara
Alvin,
stared at
good
Noah
morning
with
to
something
you.
between gratitude and amazement. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," Noah said simply. They stood in the
Susie, you
hospital hallway as morning light streamed through the windows, surrounded by the
do
quiet
you have a
bustle
place
of
you'd like to
nurses
go?
and orderlies beginning their shifts. Clara looked exhausted but relieved, and Noah felt an overwhelming urge to take care of her the way she'd
let's
been
go there.
taking care of everyone else. "You haven't slept," she observed. "Neither
we
have
still
you.
can.
I'm used to it. I'm pretty sure billionaire CEOs aren't supposed to spend the night in hospital waiting rooms. I'm pretty sure a lot of things I've been doing lately aren't supposed to happen," Noah admitted. Clara looked up at him then, really looked at him, and Noah saw the moment she recognized something had changed between them. The air grew
It's one of the
charged,
best dog
intimate,
chews there
as
is.
if they were the only
I
two
love
people in the
giving my
world.
dogs antlers.
"Noah," she whispered. He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "I know this
Sometimes
complicates
they can be
everything,"
pretty expensive,
he said.
though.
"I know we work together and this is probably a mistake and you're vulnerable right now, but..." Clara rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, cutting off his careful analysis with the simple honesty of her lips
Yep,
against
exactly.
his. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deeper as Noah's arms came around her, pulling her close against his chest. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Clara rested her forehead against his. "That wasn't a mistake," she said quietly. "Complicated, maybe, but not a mistake." Noah held her there in the hospital hallway, surrounded by the scents of disinfectant and the sounds of healing, and realized that for the first time in 15 years, he was exactly where he wanted to be. Clara stayed in Denver for a week, splitting her time between the hospital and her childhood home, a modest two-story house with a wraparound porch and a garden her mother tended with religious devotion. Noah flew back to the city but called her every evening, their conversation stretching late into the night as she sat on the
Oh, did
porch
you already
swing,
make it up-
where she'd
make it up
spent
from down
countless
low?
summer evenings as a child. "How's your
Oh,
father
okay.
today?" Noah would ask, and Clara would tell him about the small victories, how her dad had managed to walk to the
Yeah, I just
bathroom
saw-
without
I
assistance,
saw no one coming
how he'd
here.
complained about
Like,
the
I'm just
hospital
gonna,
food, which the doctor said was a good sign of returning appetite. But their conversations always drifted beyond medical updates. Clara would describe the way the mountain
yeah,
light looked different from her childhood memories, and Noah would share details about his day that he'd never bothered to notice before. How his driver always hummed jazz standards, or the
still
way his
there? What?
secretary arranged his coffee cup at precisely the same angle every morning. "I never realized how much I don't actually see," Noah admitted during one late-night call. "Everything's been functional for so long. Get from point A to point B, complete task, move to the next one. And now?"
heck is it still
Clara
there?
asked,
That's not
her
something
voice
no one
soft
can
through
do
the
or
phone.
what?
"Now I find myself wondering about things that don't matter to my bottom line, like whether you're warm enough on that porch or if the stars look the same there as they do from my apartment." Clara smiled into the darkness. "They're probably brighter here, less city light pollution. I'd like to see them sometime,
it's a good
through your
day.
eyes."
It's a
When
good
Clara
day.
returned to the city, something fundamental had shifted between them. The professional boundaries they'd maintained were still there during business hours, but they'd become more like a dance they performed for the benefit of others rather than walls they actually needed. Noah found reasons to extend their working dinners, suggesting they review plans over meals at quiet restaurants where they could talk without interruption. Clara would catch him watching her during
a big
meetings,
pot in here?
his expression soft and unguarded until he remembered where they were and snapped back into CEO mode. The Alpine Resort project was nearing completion of its design phase, which meant their official reason for spending so much time together was coming to an end. Neither of them mentioned this directly, but it hung in the air between them like a question they weren't ready to answer. On a Friday evening in mid-November, Clara was gathering her materials after a particularly productive planning session when Noah appeared in the conference room doorway. "Have dinner with me," he said without preamble. "We just finished dinner," Clara replied, gesturing to the takeout containers scattered across the table. "Chinese food, remember? Real dinner, not working dinner, just dinner." The distinction was important, and they both knew it. Clara set down her portfolio and studied his face, seeing something vulnerable in his expression that made her chest tighten. "Okay," she said simply. Noah took her to a small Italian restaurant tucked into a basement on the Lower East Side, the kind of place that didn't take reservations and where the owner's grandmother still made pasta by hand in the back kitchen. It was so far from Noah's usual world of Michelin stars and private dining rooms that Clara couldn't hide her surprise. "My business school roommate brought me here once," Noah explained as they were seated at a tiny table covered with a red checkered tablecloth. "I haven't been back in probably 15 years, but I remembered the food being incredible." The meal was exactly that, incredible in its simplicity. Fresh pasta with herbs that tasted like they'd been picked minutes before, bread so warm it steamed when they broke it open, wine that the owner's son recommended with passionate enthusiasm. But it was the conversation that made the evening unforgettable. Without the safety net of work to discuss, they ventured into more personal territory. Clara told him about her college years studying architecture, how she'd nearly quit to become a park ranger because she'd fallen in love with designing spaces that worked with nature instead of against it. Noah shared stories from his early business days, the mistakes he'd made, the mentors who'd shaped him, the moments when he'd almost walked away from everything to do something completely different. "What would you have done instead?" Clara asked. Noah considered the question seriously, swirling wine in his glass. "Teaching, maybe. I always liked the idea of helping people understand complex concepts, breaking down barriers to learning." "You'd be good at that," Clara said. "You have patience when you're explaining something you care about. I've seen you with the construction crews. You don't just tell them what to do, you help them understand why it matters." The observation surprised Noah because it suggested Clara had been watching him as carefully as he'd been watching her. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. After dinner, they walked slowly through the quiet streets, neither wanting the evening to end. The November air was crisp, but not yet bitter, and the city felt intimate around them like they were sharing a secret. "I should probably head home," Clara said when they reached the corner where she would catch a taxi. "Probably," Noah agreed, but neither of them moved. "This is complicated," Clara said softly. "Very complicated," Noah confirmed. "I don't do casual, Noah. I can't separate emotions from everything else. If we do this, if we cross this line, I need you to know that I'm not someone who can keep things simple and uncomplicated." Noah stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body in the cool air. "I don't think I want simple anymore," he said. "I've had simple for 37 years, and it's left me with a very successful, very empty life." Clara looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that he was making promises he couldn't keep. Instead, she saw something she'd never expected to find in Noah Redgrave: hope. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of caring too much. Of changing you into someone I can love and then losing the person you really are. Of not being enough to compete with your empire." Noah cupped her face in his hands, the gesture now familiar but no less electric. "Clara, you're not competing with anything. You're the first person who's ever made me want to build something just because it would make you happy." When he kissed her this time, it wasn't soft or tentative. It was full of intention, promise, and a hunger that neither of them had been willing to acknowledge before. Clara's arms wound around his neck, and she kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring months of careful restraint and growing affection into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her ear. "Come home with me," Noah said quietly. Clara was quiet for so long that Noah began to worry he'd pushed too far, too fast. Then she lifted her head and smiled at him with such warmth and certainty that it took his breath away. "Yes," she said simply. As they hailed a taxi, Noah realized that for the first time in his adult life he was about to share his private space with someone, not for business, not for networking, but simply because he couldn't bear the thought of being apart from her for even one more night. The city lights blurred past the taxi windows as they rode toward Noah's penthouse, hands intertwined, both knowing that whatever happened next would change everything between them forever. Noah's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower that scraped the Manhattan sky. As the private elevator climbed silently upward, Clara watched the city shrink below them through the transparent walls, each floor revealing more of the glittering urban landscape spread out like scattered diamonds. Second thoughts? Noah asked quietly, noticing her contemplative silence. Just taking it in, Clara replied. I've never been this high up in the city before. It's beautiful, but it feels isolated. The elevator opened directly into Noah's living space, and Clara stepped into a world that was exactly what she'd expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. The apartment was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. But it felt like a beautiful prison, all perfect surfaces and careful arrangement with no trace of the man who lived there. It's very you, Clara said, walking toward the windows that showcased the city lights. Is that good or bad? Noah asked, suddenly seeing his home through her eyes and finding it wanting. It's honest, Clara replied diplomatically, but it doesn't look like anyone actually lives here. Where do you keep your books? Your photographs? The things that make you smile when you see them? Noah realized he didn't have an answer. His books were on digital readers. His photographs were stored in cloud servers, and he couldn't remember the last time an object had made him smile simply by existing. I travel a lot, he said weakly. I try not to accumulate things that tie me down. Clara turned from the windows and walked toward him, her expression gentle but knowing. Or things that remind you that you're human. The observation stung because it was accurate. Noah had spent years perfecting the art of living without attachment, surrounding himself with beautiful objects that meant nothing to him, in spaces designed to impress rather than comfort. I have wine, he offered, feeling suddenly awkward in his own home. Good wine. Very expensive wine. Clara smiled and stepped closer, reaching up to straighten his tie even though it didn't need straightening. I don't need expensive wine, Noah. I just need you to stop performing for me. The words hit him like a revelation. He had been performing, the successful businessman showing off his achievements, trying to impress her with his wealth and power. But Clara had already seen through all of that weeks ago, had chosen to care about him despite his armor, not because of it. I don't know how to not perform, Noah admitted. It's been so long since I've just been myself with another person. Then let me help, Clara said softly. She began with his tie, sliding the silk from around his neck and draping it over a nearby chair. Then his suit jacket, which she removed with careful attention, her fingers brushing his shoulders and arms in ways that made his breath catch. Not seductive exactly, but intimate, personal, like she was unwrapping not just his clothes but the walls he'd built around himself. Better? She asked when he stood before her in just his white shirt and dark slacks. Getting there, Noah replied, his voice rougher than usual. They moved to the kitchen where Noah opened a bottle of wine, not his most expensive, but one he'd been saving for a reason he couldn't remember. Clara explored his space with gentle curiosity, noting the single coffee cup in the sink, the expensive espresso machine that showed signs of daily use, the complete absence of anything personal or sentimental. You really do live like you're ready to disappear at any moment, she observed. Old habit, Noah said, joining her with 2 glasses of wine. My parents moved us around a lot when I was young. Business acquisitions, new markets to penetrate. I learned not to get attached to places. Or people? Noah met her eyes. Especially people. They settled on the couch facing the windows, the city sprawling endlessly below them. Clara tucked her legs under her and turned to face him, wine forgotten in her hand. Tell me something real, she said. Something you've never told anyone else. Noah studied her face in the soft lighting, noting the way her hair caught the reflections from the city below, how her eyes seemed to hold depths he could spend years exploring. I used to want to be a father, he said finally. When I was younger, before I understood how cruel the world could be, I thought I'd have a family, kids who would climb on my lap and ask me to read them stories. I even had names picked out. The admission surprised him. He hadn't thought about those dreams in years, had buried them so deep he'd almost forgotten they existed. What changed your mind? Clara asked gently.
I was like,
reality,
it's right here.
Loss, the understanding that loving people just gives life more ways to destroy you. Noah paused, swirling wine in his glass, and the fear that I'd end up like my father, too focused on building something to notice that I was missing everything that actually mattered. Clara set down her wine and moved closer to him on the couch, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that reminded him of spring mornings. What if you didn't have to choose between building something and having someone to share it with, she asked. I don't know if I know how to do both. You could learn. Noah looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the beautiful, intelligent woman who had wandered into his carefully controlled life and turned it upside down, but something else. Hope, possibility, a future that didn't look like an endless series of transactions and acquisitions. Clara, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I think I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me. Instead of responding with words, Clara leaned forward and kissed him. This kiss was different from the ones they'd shared before, deeper, more certain, full of promise and acceptance. Noah's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and Clara settled against him like she belonged there. When they broke apart, Clara rested her head on his shoulder. Being terrified isn't always a bad thing, she said. Sometimes it just means you're finally doing something that matters. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the city hummed quietly below them. Eventually, Clara lifted her head and looked at him with such tenderness that Noah felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Stay, he said simply. I was hoping you'd ask. That night, Noah Redgrave learned what it felt like to share not just his bed but his vulnerabilities, his fears, his carefully guarded heart. Clara was gentle with all of it, meeting his hesitation with patience, his passion with equal intensity, his whispered confessions with understanding that ran deeper than words. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Noah watched Clara sleep beside him and realized that for the first time in his adult life, his penthouse felt like home, not because of the expensive furniture or the impressive view, but because Clara was there, her presence transforming his beautiful prison into a sanctuary. But even as contentment settled over him like a warm blanket, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered warnings about vulnerability, about the ways love could be weaponized, about the inevitable moment when happiness would be snatched away. Noah pushed the thoughts aside and pulled Clara closer, choosing for once to focus on what he had rather than what he might lose. Outside the windows, the city was waking up to a new day, and for the first time in years, so was Noah Redgrave. 3 months passed in a blur of stolen moments and careful discretion. Clara would leave her apartment each morning and arrive at Noah's office as his architect, professional and composed. But their eyes would meet across conference tables with the weight of shared intimacy, and Noah would find excuses to brush his fingers against hers when passing documents, small touches that sent electricity through both of them. Their evenings became a sanctuary. Clara would arrive at Noah's penthouse after work, transforming his sterile space into something warmer simply by being there. She brought small changes, a plant for the kitchen windowsill, books that accumulated on the coffee table, the scent of her perfume lingering on his pillows. Noah found himself looking forward to these domestic moments with an intensity that would have alarmed his younger self. The Alpine Resort project was nearly complete, its grand opening scheduled for the following month. Clara's designs had exceeded every expectation, creating spaces that felt both luxurious and welcoming, elegant without being intimidating. Trade publications were already calling it revolutionary, a new standard for hospitality design. But success brought an unexpected complication. With the project finished, Clara's official contract with Redgrave Properties would end, leaving them without a professional reason to spend their days together. We need to talk about what happens next, Noah said one evening as they lay in bed, city lights painting patterns on the ceiling above them. Clara turned to face him, her hair spilling across the pillow like silk. What do you want to happen next? It was a loaded question, and they both knew it. Noah had spent weeks avoiding this conversation, afraid to examine too closely what he was feeling, what he wanted, what he might be willing to risk. I want you to stay, he said finally. Not just tonight, not just until the project ends. I want you to stay. Clara smiled, but there was something tentative in her expression. Stay how? As your secret girlfriend who visits your apartment after business hours? As your consultant who you happen to be sleeping with? The questions hung in the air between them, exposing the fundamental issue they'd been dancing around for months. What they had was beautiful, intense, transformative, but it existed in shadows, in the margins of Noah's real life. I don't know, Noah admitted. I've never done this before. I don't know how to have a relationship that's public, that's real in ways people can see. But you want to try? Noah studied her face in the dim light, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her eyes reflected the city lights. Yes, I want to try. 2 weeks later, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She stared at the test for a full 5 minutes, sitting on the bathroom floor of her small apartment, waiting for the reality to sink in. 2 pink lines. Unmistakable. Life-changing. Her first emotion was joy. Unexpected, overwhelming joy that caught her completely off guard. She'd always wanted children someday, but someday had always felt safely distant. Now it was here, real, growing inside her. Her second emotion was terror, not of motherhood, but of Noah's reaction. They'd been together for only 3 months, had just begun talking about a real future together. A baby would change everything, accelerate every timeline, force decisions they weren't ready to make. Clara spent the weekend alone, walking through Central Park and trying to imagine how to tell the man she'd fallen in love with that their careful courtship had just become something much more complicated. On Monday morning, she arrived at Noah's office as usual, but couldn't concentrate on the design revisions they were supposed to review. Noah noticed immediately. He'd become attuned to her moods, her expressions, the subtle changes in her energy that others might miss. "You're somewhere else today," he observed during a quiet moment when they were alone in the conference room. "I need to tell you something," Clara said, her voice steady despite the butterflies rioting in her stomach. "Something important." Noah's expression grew serious. He closed his laptop and gave her his full attention, that focused intensity she'd come to treasure and fear in equal measure. "I'm pregnant," Clara said simply. The words landed between them like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread outward in ever-widening circles. Noah's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, something that might have been panic, and finally, a careful blankness that Clara had learned to recognize as his defensive mode. "How?" he asked, then immediately looked embarrassed by the question. "The usual way," Clara replied with a small smile. "These things happen, even when you're careful." Noah stood up and walked to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture Clara had seen him adopt during difficult business negotiations. She could practically see his mind working, calculating implications, assessing risks and opportunities. "What do you want to do?" he asked without turning around. The question stung because it suggested this was entirely her decision, her problem to solve. Clara had hoped for something different. Surprise, yes, but also joy, excitement, a sense that they were in this together. "I want to keep it," Clara said quietly. "The baby. I want to have our child." Noah's shoulders tensed. "Clara, this changes everything. The timeline, the complexity, the public scrutiny when people find out. I know it's not what we planned. We didn't plan anything," Noah interrupted, finally turning to face her. "That was the point. We were taking things slowly, figuring out how to make this work without disrupting everything I've built." Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. "And now I've disrupted it." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." They stared at each other across the conference room, the easy intimacy of the past month suddenly feeling fragile and uncertain. Clara could see Noah retreating, pulling back into the controlled, calculating persona he wore like armor. "I need time to think," Noah said finally. "About what? About whether you want to be involved? About whether this is worth the inconvenience to your perfectly ordered life? That's not fair, isn't it?" Clara stood up, gathering her portfolio with hands that trembled slightly. "I'm not asking you for anything, Noah. I'm not asking you to marry me or support me or change your life. I'm just telling you that I'm having your baby because I thought you had a right to know." "Clara, wait." But she was already at the door, pausing only to look back at him with eyes that held disappointment and something that looked like the beginning of goodbye. "When you're done thinking, you know where to find me," she said. After she left, Noah stood alone in the conference room, staring out at the city that suddenly felt as cold and distant as the expression he'd seen in Clara's eyes. For 3 months, he'd been living in a world where love felt possible, where vulnerability was a strength rather than a weakness. Now, faced with the ultimate vulnerability of bringing a child into the world, every defense mechanism he'd spent decades perfecting was screaming at him to run, to protect himself, to choose the safety of solitude over the terrifying uncertainty of love. But as he touched the conference table where Clara had left behind one of her sketches, a drawing of the resort's children's play area, complete with tiny figures of families enjoying the space together. Noah realized that running might protect his empire, but it would destroy the only thing in his life that had ever felt like home. For 3 days, Noah threw himself into work with the desperate intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. He arrived at the office before dawn and stayed until the cleaning crews finished their shifts, reviewing contracts that didn't need reviewing, calling meetings that could have been emails, doing anything to avoid the silence where Clara's words echoed endlessly. "I'm having your baby." The phrase followed him everywhere, into boardrooms where he lost his train of thought mid-presentation, onto elevators where he found himself staring at his reflection and seeing his father's face, into his penthouse where Clara's absence felt like a physical ache. His assistant had fielded a dozen calls from Clara's office, each one asking if Mr. Redgrave was available for a brief conversation. Each time, Noah had said he was busy, knowing it was cowardice but unable to face her until he'd sorted through the chaos in his head. On Thursday evening, Noah's carefully constructed avoidance strategy crumbled when he found Clara waiting in the lobby of his building. She looked tired, her usual glow dimmed by stress and the early stages of pregnancy, but her spine was straight, and her chin raised with the quiet dignity he'd fallen in love with. "Security said you were expecting me," Clara said as Noah approached, his steps slowing when he saw her. "I wasn't. I told them I was your architect, technically still true for another week." Clara's smile held no warmth. "We need to talk, Noah. Really talk. Not through assistants and voice messages." The elevator ride to his penthouse was silent, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Noah's apartment felt different with Clara there. Not warm and welcoming as it had for months, but cold and sterile again, as if her hurt had stripped away all the comfort her presence had brought. "Would you like something to drink?" Noah offered, falling back on formal politeness because he didn't know how else to bridge the distance between them. "I'm pregnant, remember? No alcohol, no caffeine after 2 o'clock, no sushi, no soft cheese, no lunch meat." Clara's voice was matter-of-fact, but Noah caught the underlying message. She was already changing her life to accommodate their child, while he'd spent 3 days hiding from the reality of it. They sat on opposite ends of the couch that had once felt intimate, the space between them feeling vast as an ocean. Clara folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with the patience of someone who'd spent days preparing for this conversation. "I'm not going to pretend this isn't complicated," she began. "I know you didn't plan for this, neither did I, but I need to know where you stand because I have decisions to make about my future, our child's future." Noah stared out at the city lights, gathering thoughts that felt scattered like puzzle pieces. "What kind of decisions? Whether to stay in New York or move back to Colorado, where I have family support. Whether to keep my apartment or look for something bigger. Whether to tell my parents that my baby's father is someone they'll never meet, or someone who wants to be involved." Each possibility felt like a blow to Noah's chest. The reality of Clara leaving, of his child growing up without him, hitting him with unexpected force. "I keep thinking about my father," Noah said finally. "How he loved my mother and me, but loved his work more. How he missed school plays and birthday dinners and bedtime stories because there was always another deal, another crisis, another opportunity that couldn't wait. You're not your father. How do you know?" Noah turned to face her, his expression raw with vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "I've spent my entire adult life becoming him, building the same empire, making the same choices, prioritizing the same things." Clara leaned forward, her green eyes intense with conviction. "Because your father never sat in his living room terrified that he might hurt the people he loved. Your father never questioned whether his priorities were wrong. You're having this crisis because you care more than you want to admit." Noah felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking, but yielding like ice beginning to thaw. "I'm scared, Clara. I'm scared that I'll love you and this baby so much that I'll lose everything else. And I'm scared that I won't be able to love you enough, that my fear will destroy what we have before I figure out how to choose both." "Both what?" "Both you and the life I've built. The empire and the family. The control and the vulnerability." Clara was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the soft lighting. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "I can't make that choice for you, Noah. I can tell you that I love you, that I believe you're capable of being the man and father you want to be. But I can't want it more than you do." Noah reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. Her skin was warm, her fingers steady and sure, in a way that made him feel anchored. "What if I mess this up?" he asked. "What if I'm so busy protecting what we have that I destroy it? What if I can't give you and the baby what you deserve?" "What if you can?" Clara countered. What if choosing love doesn't mean losing everything else? What if it means finally having something worth all the success you've built? Noah brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. I want to try. I want to be better than my fear, better than my father. I want to be someone worthy of you and this baby. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. You already are, Noah. You just have to choose to believe it. That night, they made love with a tenderness that felt like a promise, like two people choosing each other despite their fears. Noah held Clara afterward, his hand resting on her stomach where their child was growing, and whispered apologies for the days of silence, promises for the future they would build together. But even as contentment settled over them, as Clara fell asleep in his arms and Noah allowed himself to imagine a life that included both empire and family, neither of them could have predicted how quickly everything would change. The next morning, Noah would wake to find Clara in the bathroom, pale and shaking, blood staining her nightgown as her body rejected the pregnancy they'd finally chosen to embrace together. And in the sterile lights of the emergency room, faced with the devastating loss of their child, all of Noah's carefully constructed new courage would crumble, leaving him exactly where his father had been, successful, powerful, and utterly, devastatingly alone. The miscarriage happened on a Tuesday morning, swift and merciless as a knife through silk. One moment Clara was making coffee in Noah's kitchen, humming softly as she planned the day ahead, and the next she was doubled over in pain, calling his name with a voice that would haunt his dreams for months to come. The hospital became a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices, doctors speaking in measured tones about inevitable losses and bodies that sometimes reject what they're not ready to carry. Noah held Clara's hand through the worst of it, watching the light dim in her eyes as they lost the future they'd just learned to want. I'm sorry, she whispered afterward, lying in the hospital bed looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. Don't, Noah said, his voice rough with exhaustion and grief. Don't apologize for something that wasn't your fault. But even as he said the words, something dark and poisonous was taking root in his chest. Doubt, suspicion, the old voices that had kept him safe for so long, whispering that love was just another word for vulnerability, that caring about someone only gave life more ways to destroy you. They went home to his penthouse that evening in silence. Clara moved through his space like a ghost, touching nothing, avoiding the kitchen where she'd collapsed, the couch where they'd planned their future, the bed where they'd made the child they'd just lost. I should go back to my apartment, Clara said as Noah poured himself a whiskey with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Stay, Noah replied without looking at her. The doctor said you shouldn't be alone. I won't be alone. I have friends, people who care about me. The emphasis on the last word was subtle but unmistakable. Noah caught it, felt it lodge between his ribs like a splinter. Over the next few days, Noah watched Clara grieve with the same quiet grace she brought to everything else. She cried, but privately. She spoke to her mother on long phone calls that he tried not to overhear. She researched miscarriage support groups and natural healing methods with the methodical thoroughness she applied to her design work. What she didn't do was talk to him. Not really. They existed in parallel universes of loss, sharing space but not comfort, going through the motions of togetherness while growing further apart by the hour. Noah told himself he was giving her space to heal. In reality, he was protecting himself from the raw intimacy of shared grief, from the vulnerability of admitting how much the loss had shattered him too. It was easier to retreat into work, into the familiar armor of spreadsheets and conference calls. A week after the miscarriage, Clara found him in his home office at 2 a.m, surrounded by contracts and financial reports. You can't work your way through this, she said from the doorway. I'm not trying to work through anything, Noah replied without looking up. I'm trying to catch up on everything I've neglected. Everything like us? Noah finally raised his head, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench with a different kind of loss. He looked at her like she was a stranger, like the intimacy they'd shared had been filed away with other concluded business. Clara, we need to be realistic about what happened. What happened is that we lost our baby. What happened, Noah said, his voice taking on the cold precision he used in hostile negotiations, is that we let an unplanned pregnancy cloud our judgment about what this relationship actually was. Clara stared at him, feeling the words hit her like physical blows. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe this was a wake-up call, a reminder that we come from different worlds, want different things. You want a family, stability, the kind of life I'm not equipped to provide. I want you, Clara said simply. I've only ever wanted you. Noah stood up, pacing to the windows that overlooked his kingdom of lights and steel. You think you do.
Wait.
But look at what wanting me has cost you. The stress of hiding our relationship, the complications of being involved with someone like me. Maybe that contributed to what happened. You think this is my fault? Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. I think we both made choices that led to an impossible situation, Noah replied. And each word felt like he was swallowing glass. I think maybe it's better this way. Better? Clara laughed, but the sound was hollow, broken. Better for who, Noah? For you, because now you don't have to risk actually letting someone love you? Or better for me, because I get to learn that the man I thought I knew was just another rich bastard who runs when things get complicated? Noah turned to face her, and for a moment his mask slipped. Clara saw the pain there, the fear, the love he was desperately trying to kill before it could kill him. But then the walls slammed back down, and he was once again the untouchable CEO she'd met 6 months ago. I think you should go, he said quietly. Clara nodded, though tears were streaming down her face. You know what the saddest part is? I actually believed you when you said you wanted to be different. I believed you were brave enough to choose love over fear. She walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. When you realize what you've thrown away, don't come looking for me. I won't be your consolation prize when you get tired of being alone. After Clara left, Noah stood in his office surrounded by the detritus of his empire. Contracts and reports and profit margins that suddenly felt meaningless as ash. He told himself he'd made the right choice, the smart choice, the safe choice. But as dawn broke over the city, painting his penthouse in shades of gold and regret, Noah Redgrave sat in his perfect empty apartment and wondered if safety was worth the price of dying inside. 3 months later, his phone would ring with news that would shatter every certainty he'd built his life around. Clara's voice, shaky but determined, telling him that she was in labor at Manhattan General Hospital, that there hadn't been one baby, but two, that the miscarriage had been a vanishing twin and one child, their child, had survived against all odds, that he was about to become a father whether he was ready or not. But for now, Noah sat alone with his choice, surrounded by everything he'd thought he wanted, and learned what it truly meant to lose everything that actually mattered. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in March, cutting through the silence of Noah's penthouse like a blade through skin. He'd been standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows, nursing his third whiskey of the evening and staring at the city lights that had once seemed like evidence of his conquest, but now felt like a million tiny reminders of his isolation. For 6 months, he'd perfected the art of not thinking about Clara Everett. He buried himself in acquisitions and expansions, opened 2 new hotels in Dubai, closed a resort deal in the Maldives. His empire grew larger. His bank account swelled, and his life became exactly what it had been before she'd walked into his conference room with her auburn hair and dangerous smile. Empty, successful, meaningless. Noah almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something, intuition, desperation, or maybe just the whiskey, made him swipe to accept the call. Mr. Redgrave? The voice was unfamiliar, professional, tinged with urgency. This is Dr. Miranda Lopez from Manhattan General Hospital. I'm calling about Clara Everett. The bottom dropped out of Noah's world. Every muscle in his body went rigid, every carefully constructed wall he'd built around her memory crumbling in an instant. What's wrong? Is she hurt? What happened? Sir, Ms. Everett is in labor. She's requested that we contact you. She says you're the father. Noah's hand tightened around the phone so hard he was surprised it didn't shatter. That's impossible. She lost the baby. We lost the baby months ago. Mr. Redgrave, she's delivering twins. Apparently what appeared to be a miscarriage was actually vanishing twin syndrome. One fetus was lost, but the other continued to develop. She's been carrying your child for the past 6 months. The words hit Noah like a physical blow. He sat down heavily in his chair, the glass of whiskey slipping from his nerveless fingers to shatter on the marble floor. Twins, he repeated numbly. Yes, sir, and one of them is in distress. We need you to get here as quickly as possible. Noah was moving before he'd fully processed the doctor's words, grabbing his coat, his keys, his wallet, muscle memory taking over while his brain struggled to catch up with the impossible reality. Clara was having his babies, plural. Right now, the drive to the hospital passed in a blur of red lights and racing thoughts. 6 months.
Man,
Clara had been pregnant for 6 months, had known she was carrying his child and hadn't told him, had gone through the fear and joy and physical discomfort alone, while he'd convinced himself he was better off without her. Manhattan General's maternity ward was a maze of sterile corridors and hushed urgency. Noah followed a nurse through hallways that seemed to stretch forever, his heart hammering against his ribs with each step. "She's in the delivery room," the nurse explained as they walked. "Labor started suddenly about 3 hours ago. One baby is crowning, but the other is breech and showing signs of distress. We may need to do an emergency cesarean." Noah stopped walking. "Is she... Are they going to be okay?" The nurse's expression was kind, but guarded. "We're doing everything we can, Mr. Redgrave, but you should know this is high risk. Multiple births always are, especially when there are complications." They reached a set of double doors marked, "Authorized personnel only." Through the small windows, Noah could see a flurry of medical activity. Bright lights and green scrubs and machines that beeped with mechanical urgency. And in the center of it all, Clara, even from a distance, even surrounded by doctors and nurses and medical equipment, she was the most beautiful thing Noah had ever seen. Her face was flushed with exertion and pain, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but her expression held a strength and determination that took his breath away. "Clara," he whispered, pressing his palm against the glass, as if she could hear him through the chaos. Clara's head turned toward the doors. Their eyes met across the sterile distance, and Noah saw everything he'd tried to forget. Everything he'd convinced himself didn't matter. Love, forgiveness, hope, and a fierce protectiveness that made his knees weak. She was having his children, and she was magnificent. "Mr. Redgrave?" Dr. Lopez appeared beside him, scrubs rumpled, expression serious. "We need to take the second baby by cesarean. The cord is wrapped around its neck and we're losing time." "Do it," Noah said immediately. "Do whatever you have to do. Save them. Save her. There are risks. I don't care about risks. Save my family." The words surprised him with their intensity, their certainty. My family. When had he started thinking of Clara and these babies as his family? The answer came immediately. The moment he'd first kissed her in that hospital hallway months ago. He'd just been too terrified to admit it. The next hour was the longest of Noah's life. He paced the waiting room like a caged animal, ignoring the concerned looks from other expectant fathers, checking his phone obsessively for updates he knew wouldn't come. At 2:17 a.m., Dr. Lopez emerged from the delivery room, still in scrubs but smiling. "Mr. Redgrave?" Noah shot to his feet. "Are they okay?" "Congratulations. You have a son and a daughter. Both babies are healthy, though they'll need to spend a few days in the NICU for observation. And Clara is doing well. She's asking for you." Noah felt his knees give way. He sat down hard in the plastic chair, overwhelmed by relief, so intense it felt like drowning. "They're okay? Really okay? Really okay? Would you like to meet your children?" The NICU was a wonderland of soft lighting and gentle sounds. Cribs lined up like promises of the future. Noah followed the nurse to 2 small isolates in the corner and felt his heart stop completely. They were perfect. Impossibly, miraculously perfect. The boy was slightly larger, with a shock of dark hair that looked exactly like Noah's. The girl was tinier but fierce-looking even in sleep, with Clara's delicate features and what appeared to be his stubborn chin. "You can touch them," the nurse said gently. "They need to know you're here." Noah reached into the first isolate with hands that shook like leaves, brushing one finger along his son's tiny fist. The baby's fingers curled around his immediately, gripping with surprising strength. "Hello," Noah whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm your dad. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." The baby boy's eyes opened, gray-blue like his own, and stared up at him with what looked like ancient wisdom. Noah felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Every priority he'd ever had rearranging itself around this tiny person who shared his DNA, and somehow, impossibly, already owned his heart. He moved to his daughter's isolette next, marveling at her perfect miniature fingernails, the way her chest rose and fell with each precious breath. "And you," he said to her, "you're going to be just like your mother, aren't you? Beautiful and strong and braver than anyone has a right to be." "They don't have names yet," the nurse mentioned. "Clara wanted to wait for you." Noah's throat tightened. Even after everything he'd put her through, Clara had waited for him, had saved this moment, this choice, for both of them to make together. "Can I see her?" he asked. Clara was in a private room down the hall, propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright. And when Noah appeared in the doorway, her expression cycled through surprise, joy, and something that looked like forgiveness. "You came," she said softly. "I came as soon as I knew." "Clara, Noah stopped, overwhelmed by everything he wanted to say, everything he should have said months ago. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For being afraid. For pushing you away. For not being here. You're here now," Clara said simply. "That's what matters." Noah approached her bed slowly, afraid she might tell him to leave, afraid this was all a dream he'd wake up from. But Clara reached for his hand, and when their fingers intertwined, it felt like coming home. "They're beautiful," Noah said. "Perfect. How did you do this alone?" "I wasn't alone," Clara replied. "I had friends, family, people who cared, and I had them." She nodded toward the NICU. "They kept me going when everything else felt impossible. I should have been here. I should have known, should have." "Noah," Clara squeezed his hand. "You're here now. We're all here now. That's what matters." Noah brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I love you," he said. "I've loved you since that first day when you told me my hotels were soulless. I was just too scared to admit it, too scared to risk everything I'd built. And now I know that everything I built was worthless without you and them to share it with." Noah looked into her eyes, seeing his future reflected there. "Marry me, Clara. Let me be their father, your husband. Let me spend the rest of my life making up for the months I wasted being afraid." Clara smiled, the same unguarded smile that had captured his heart in a conference room a lifetime ago. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Through the window of Clara's hospital room, dawn was breaking over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility. And for the first time in his life, Noah Redgrave looked at the sunrise and saw not another day to conquer, but another day to love and be loved in return. 2 years later, the Alpine resort looked exactly as Clara had envisioned it 2.5 years ago. Warm wood tones catching the afternoon sunlight, stone fireplaces crackling with welcoming fires, and large windows that brought the mountain landscape inside. But today it held something extra. The sound of children's laughter echoing through spaces that had been designed with love and were now filled with it. Noah Redgrave stood on the resort's main terrace. His daughter Sophia balanced on his hip, while his son Alexander chased butterflies through the wildflower garden that Clara had insisted on planting, despite the landscaper's protests. At 18 months old, the twins were walking, talking, and displaying personalities as distinct as their parents had once been opposite. Sophia was the quieter one, content to observe the world with serious gray eyes that missed nothing, while Alexander was pure energy and motion, curiosity driving him to explore every corner of his expanding universe. Both of them had inherited Clara's fearless smile and Noah's stubborn determination, a combination that kept their parents exhausted and completely besotted. "Dada, down!" Sophia demanded, wiggling in his arms with increasing insistence. "Say please, sweetheart," Noah said automatically, still amazed at how naturally the gentle corrections of parenthood had come to him. "Peas down," Noah set her on the ground, watching as she toddled toward her brother with the focused determination of someone on an important mission. Everything the twins did felt important to Noah now. First steps, first words, the way they looked at him with complete trust and love that he was still learning to believe he deserved. "They're going to be covered in dirt before the photos," Clara observed, emerging from the resort's main entrance with wedding planning files tucked under her arm and a smudge of what looked like frosting on her cheek. "Good," Noah replied, pulling her close and kissing away the frosting. "I want them to look like children, not museum pieces." Clara smiled, leaning into his embrace as they watched their children discover a particularly fascinating rock that apparently required extensive examination by both parties. "Remember when you worried about being like your father? I remember being an idiot about a lot of things. You weren't an idiot. You were scared." Clara's voice held the gentle understanding that had become her signature way of reframing his past mistakes as human, rather than moral failures. "There's a difference." Tomorrow, the resort would host their wedding, a small, intimate celebration with family and close friends. Nothing like the elaborate corporate networking events that had once defined Noah's social calendar. Clara had insisted on simplicity, wildflowers instead of orchids, handwritten vows instead of traditional ceremony, A reception that would end early enough for the twins to participate without meltdowns. Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you finished your vows, Clara said, referencing the officiant they'd chosen, a retired judge who'd married Clara's parents 35 years earlier. I've written 17 different versions, Noah admitted. They're all either too long, too sentimental, or too much like a business proposal. Maybe that's because you're overthinking it. What would you say to me if we were alone, if no one else was listening? Noah considered the question, watching Alexander present Sophia with a flower that was more stem than bloom, witnessing his daughter's delighted laughter at the imperfect gift. I'd say that I spent 37 years building a life that looked impressive from the outside, but felt empty from the inside, Noah said slowly. I'd say that meeting you taught me the difference between success and happiness, between being powerful and being loved. That's beautiful, Clara whispered. I'd say that watching you become a mother has been like watching someone perform miracles daily. The way you sing to them when they can't sleep, how you turn scraped knees into adventures, how you make them feel safe enough to explore the world because they know you'll always be there to catch them if they fall. Clara's eyes filled with the happy tears that had become frequent since becoming parents. Emotions running closer to the surface, joy and exhaustion intertwining in ways that made everything feel more vivid. I tell you that I'm not the same man who was too afraid to love you completely, Noah continued. That becoming their father changed something fundamental in me, made me understand that the only legacy worth building is the one we create together, in the way we raise them, the way we love each other, the way we choose each other every single day. Noah, and I'd promise that I'll never run again, that when things get difficult, and they will because that's life, I'll stay and fight for us instead of protecting myself from us. Clara stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, tasting salt from her own tears and something sweeter, the flavor of promises kept and futures embraced. Those are perfect vows, she whispered against his lips. Mama, Dada. Alexander came running toward them, clutching something in his small fist. Look. He opened his hand to reveal a smooth riverstone, perfectly round and warm from his palm. To anyone else, it would have been unremarkable. To Noah, it was treasure beyond price, not because of any inherent value, but because his son had thought it beautiful enough to share. It's perfect, buddy, Noah said, crouching down to Alexander's level. Just like you. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, the Redgrave family settled on the terrace's comfortable chairs. Noah held Sophia while she drowsily fought sleep, her small head heavy against his shoulder. Clara curled up beside them with Alexander, reading from a picture book about brave little rabbits who weren't afraid of the dark. 6 months earlier, Noah had made a decision that would have been unthinkable to his former self. He'd stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Redgrave Properties, promoting his most trusted lieutenant to CEO while retaining his position as chairman. The change had freed him to focus on what mattered most, being present for the small moments that comprised a life well lived. What are you thinking about? Clara asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Just this, Noah said, gesturing to encompass the four of them. The resort that bore Clara's creative fingerprints, the mountains that had witnessed his transformation from a man afraid to love into someone brave enough to build his happiness on the foundation of another person's heart. Any regrets? Noah looked at his wife. Legally, they'd married 6 months after the twins were born in a small courthouse ceremony, but tomorrow would be their real wedding, the celebration they'd always wanted, and felt the same wonder that had overtaken him in that hospital room 2 years ago. My only regret is how long it took me to get here, he said. How much time I wasted being afraid of the best thing that ever happened to me. We're here now, Clara said simply. That's what matters. As night fell over the mountains and their children finally surrendered to sleep, Noah and Clara sat together on the terrace, where tomorrow they would promise to love each other for the rest of their lives. The promise felt redundant. They'd been living it for 2 years already, in sleepless nights with teething babies, in the way Clara had supported his evolution from workaholic to present father, in Noah's commitment to showing up fully for every milestone, every tantrum, every ordinary Tuesday that made up the extraordinary tapestry of their shared life. I love you, Noah said into the comfortable silence, words he now spoke as easily as breathing. I love you too, Clara replied, her hand finding his in the darkness. All of you, the man you were, the man you are, the man you're still becoming. Above them, stars began to appear in the clear mountain sky, And Noah remembered a conversation from long ago about seeing things through Clara's eyes. Now he understood what she'd meant. It wasn't about the stars themselves, but about having someone to point them out to. Someone who made even the familiar seem miraculous. Tomorrow, they would stand before their family and friends and promise to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of their love, surrounded by the sleeping forms of the children who had taught them that the heart's capacity for love was infinite, Noah Redgrave was already home. This wasn't a story about a billionaire who changed for love. This was the story of a man who discovered that love didn't require him to change. It simply revealed who he'd always had the courage to become. What about you? Have you ever been so afraid of losing control that you almost lost the person who mattered most? What would you have done in Noah's situation when Clara told him she was pregnant? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.